Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to our panel for taking their seats. And that's a hard act to follow, isn't it? Yes. So thank you. But I'm really delighted to have you here. As I said at the beginning, in our track on inclusive peace for our roundtables, we've been discussing whether there's a need for a new alliance to promote inclusive peace. So a new alliance that would support the work of Dror and Hadir, and that would go towards inclusive peace, that would draw together the voices of those who are working for peace. I suppose it's important to say for anybody who hasn't been with us in those tracks that our conversation on how to promote a new alliance towards inclusive peace has built on several meetings we've had already. One was a meeting that we had last February at Wilton Park, which looked at the role of religious leaders in countering dehumanization and polarization and the role that faith actors could play in that. Then in June in Rome with the Interparliamentary Union, we had another meeting with faith leaders and with parliamentarians to look at that issue of inclusive peace and how to form a new narrative. And then in Geneva, there was a meeting with parliamentarians and peace-building organisations in Geneva, Michael, with your organisation with Faiths for Rights. So there's very much been a momentum building towards asking that question, whether the time is right now, whether there is a new momentum to try and strengthen that voice to counter polarizing narratives and dehumanizing narratives. And of course, what Dror and Hadir have been talking about in Israel and Palestine is perhaps the clearest example of those polarizing and dehumanizing narratives. So maybe I can turn to our speakers to try and draw together some of the threads of our conversation, and I'll introduce them in turn as they speak. So Peter, you're going to be our first speaker. So Peter Mandeville. Peter, you bring a really wealth of experience in working with faith actors, not just with your work with USAID and the Institute of Peace, but now at Georgetown and at the George Mason University. This is a field of working with faith actors that you know very well. So I thought it a good idea to start with you, to just ask, why might we need something new that might come out of the work of or bring together faith actors who have that voice for inclusive peace? What is missing that might mean we need some sort of new initiative now? Peter?
Yeah. Thanks very much, Allison, and good morning, everyone. I think there are two global contextual factors at play today that are part of the answer to the question you've posed. One is what I think we all sense as something of a growing moral vacuum in world affairs, persistent decline in respect for and adherence to any number of standards that humanity has developed collectively, human rights, sustainable development goals, civility. And in addition to that, we have today two major armed conflicts that both have an important religious dimension to them. Two conflicts that are entering their endgames, hopefully. The Israel-Palestine conflict, whose religious dimensions are obvious and yet very complex, and the war in Ukraine, which has an often neglected but still very present religious dimension. And indeed, in both cases, religion is present in the discussions about ending the conflicts. In President Trump's 20-point plan, there is a point 18, which talks about the need for a new format of interfaith dialogue. And in the case of the conflict in Ukraine, when President Putin has spelled out his requirements for ending that conflict, guarantees with respect to the religious freedom of one branch of the Orthodox Church in Ukraine is part of that. And so, given this, I think we do need to ask questions about what kind of moral infrastructure will be needed globally to deliver on these challenges. Obviously, each of those two conflicts will need its own regional process. You know, the work that Hadir and Dror are doing is I think deeply inspiring and exactly what's needed at the regional level for Israel-Palestine. And I've had the privilege to get to know and work with similar groups in Ukraine doing the same kind of work. But I think there is also space for a transnational, international support network to provide the moral scaffolding that can validate, endorse, and support this work. And just very briefly, I think there are three key features that would need to be present for this to be effective. One is that it would need to be genuinely non-governmental in nature. There's a lot of religion in geopolitics today. The number of great powers around the world that are instrumentally making use of religion to advance various agendas is simply growing. And there's a risk that work that focuses on the role of religion in resolving conflicts ends up getting co-opted by state actors, and we definitely don't need that. Second, it needs to have the right kinds of religious voices and other voices present in it. Not necessarily the top leadership of the world's faith traditions, who obviously exist within their kind of own elite stratosphere, but a mid-level set of religious leaders that have the ability to speak truth to power while remaining independent of government, and who also have the ability to connect with the lived reality on the ground of communities in conflict. And finally, I think that this needs to be a multi-sectoral group. Yes, faith actors should be its center of gravity, the core of it, but if you have only religious actors, then it's really just another format of interreligious dialogue, and you're yet again setting religion aside, keeping it apart from where the action is, as it were. And so this needs to be a broader civil society group that brings faith actors together along with other voices in civil society that stand for and speak for that moral infrastructure that we so desperately need today. I think Globethics and the Global Ethics Forum is a perfect setting for us, therefore, to be having this conversation.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. So really interesting. So international support network to provide the moral scaffolding to help promote inclusive peace. I mean, you talk about faith actors being the center of gravity. So I wonder, just might I have a challenge and bring in our next speaker, if I may, who is Rudolf von Sinner, Professor of Theology at the Pontifical Catholic University of Brazil, and also a member of Globethics, pool of experts. So when Peter talks about faith actors being at the center of gravity, we have to recognize the complexity here, that not all faith actors speak with the same voice, and not all faith actors have talk of inclusive peace as top of their agenda, that some faith actors actually have been part of that dehumanizing narrative and polarization. So can you help us deal with that complexity, and whether is what we're looking for an alliance of like-minded faith actors and others who might come together in this international support network Peter talks about?
Yeah, thank you, Allison, and thank you all for contributing too much to this discussion as we went through the days since we started. I'm also still impacted by Dror's and Hadi's testimony here, so we can see how in small moments a counter-narrative can actually happen, and we need so much of a counter-narrative, which I see in my own reading of my religion and of my theology as very central. But it's not central necessarily in the politics of religious leaders and religious communities. So religion is a very mixed bag. On the one hand, it's very present on the ground. It can create moments of mercy. It preaches mercy and justice. It can create moments of care, of support, of cooperation against sickness, against hunger, against suffering. This is very present in many places, and we call it in Brazil capillarity, like the small veins in our hands and feet which bring oxygen to the distant limbs. Churches are everywhere. They are in the favelas as in the centers. And if it were not so, I think we would be in a much worse situation in terms of relief and support, because the state often is not getting there, and even NGOs are not getting there, and other institutions. So I think religion we need them. Yeah, for the work on the ground. On the other hand, often they are part not only of the solution but of the problem. And the conflicts you have talked about, like Russia, Ukraine, and also Israel-Palestine, that is very evident. Not only are they instrumentalized, that would even be somehow relieving for a theologian to say, well, it's the others who co-opt us, but it's actually often religious communities that actively contribute to that and create a narrative of dominion. In Brazil today, we have lots of theology of dominion, and in both Americas, I would say, where the idea is we have to take the government for God. Yeah. And that then also has a bearing on conflicts which seem distant, like the conflict in Palestine, but actually makes Christians to be insensitive, many Christians insensitive to what's happening there in terms of destruction, suffering, and death, because they see this is part of a big plan which God is making, and we have to be part of this. So this narrative, I think, has to be countered. And I see God and the religious message, I come from the Christian tradition, so that's what I can speak from, as a counter-narrative which is like a mirror to us. Who are we and what are we doing? And often this mirror will not show nice things. It will show an ugly human being with all it does. And also religions have to show, of course, up in that mirror. The religious leaders, the believers themselves, not only for the others. That would also be easy. It's always the others who are the culprits. But actually, we have to look for ourselves and then to say, well, this is not what we were meant to be. This is not what we are meant to be now, and what role we have to play. In Brazil, I just saw the statistics, 44,000 violent deaths happened. It's not a war in a declared sense, but it is a war on a small scale happening. Now, if 90% of the population says to be Christian, how can this happen? On both sides, they are Christian. There's something deeply wrong there. And thankfully, small communities, but also theologians and some church leaders speak out against that and take a different stance. So, and this should be strengthened. I think the alliance, as this is proposed, it can strengthen these voices. For the religions to take another stance and another look, this presupposes honesty, humility, but also the courage not to stop there, but to seek and foster peace precisely as we recognize its absence. And as part of the counter-narrative in my religious conception, God is present not in the centers of power, be they government houses or cathedrals, but in the fissures and fractures of life. The central symbol of Christianity, as you know, is the cross, a horrible symbol in the at first sight, where God in humanity suffered torture and death, humiliation and utmost vulnerability and pain. This is both divine presence in the abysses of humanity and protest against dehumanization. And as I learned yesterday in the conversation with a rabbi, as we shared a meal and entered deep conversation, Jesus assumes suffering but refuses to be a victim. A rabbi taught me that. Thank you so much for it. And the Christmas story, and I end with that, the Christmas story tells us Jesus had to be born in a humble stable because there was no other room available. Palestinian theologian Munter Isaac radicalizes this in the context of the war in Gaza and of the destruction, and he says Christ was not born even in straw and wood, but on the rubble that come from disruption of bombing of houses in Gaza. And I think this shows us a counter-narrative which can bring out the good things of religion, which is to assume suffering as a reality and to support people who are in it, but to not accept to be a victim. And I think that's the strength we could bring out and strengthen through such an alliance also. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudolf, very much indeed. Very interesting to reflect on the role of faith leaders as a counter-narrative that's a mirror to us all, a self-critical mirror. So thank you very much on unpacking some of that complexity for us. Peter talked about faith actors perhaps being at the centre of gravity of any new alliance, but that other actors needed to be engaged in this broad alliance to try and counter the narrative of polarisation and dehumanisation. So Anda, might I bring you in, please? So Anda Philip is the Director of Member Parliaments and External Relations at the Interparliamentary Union, the oldest interparliamentary organisation in the world. Delighted to have you with us, and delighted that you took up this theme at your meeting in Rome in June too. So I'm very keen to hear from you whether you think the time is right for a new alliance that might engage parliamentarians, and if so, what role the IPU might play in that. So thank you, Anda.
Thank you very much, Allison, and good morning to everyone. It's a great pleasure to see so many familiar faces in the room, and I feel that already we are part of an alliance. Thank you, Fadi, for the invitation. I note that the theme of the Global Ethics Forum is reinventing responsible governance. And I think that responsible governance and peaceful societies, inclusive peace, these are indeed at the very core of the work of our organization as a global organization of national parliaments. And to use a term from that Rudolf just used, yes, indeed. Sometimes we are keenly aware, of course, that maybe the institution of parliament and parliamentarians, politicians, are not at the very top of public trust in the world today. However, we do see parliaments and MPs as part of the solution and essential elements, and if they're not, then the question is, how can we help them become agents of positive change? And, you know, we are inspired by the examples that we see on a regular basis. You know, it was an MP, Philippe Mahou, a senator from Belgium, who in Africa witnessed the devastation of cluster munitions. He went back home, he introduced legislation to ban the production and transfer and investment in cluster munitions. Belgium was the first country to adopt this legislation, and this set the stage for an international movement that led to the adoption of the convention. And that's just one example of what one person can do where there is passion and where there is political will. Just to give you a little bit a sense of where we're coming from, and then I'll respond to your question. Indeed, what we're trying to do very hard is to, on the one hand, create those platforms for, or offer those platforms for political dialogue, because it's only by talking to people that you can develop an understanding of the perspective of the other. I was tremendously moved by the testimony by Dror and Gadir earlier this morning, and you know, Palestine has been, the situation in the Middle East, on our agenda for a long time, and it hasn't always been easy. It's a very hot topic. People become emotional. These are politicians. Sometimes they need to speak to their public audience back home. But we were, I think, very much impressed by the fact that, you know, at our last assembly in Tashkent, in the month of April, it was a small group of MPs from different regions, from Algeria, from Ireland, from South Africa, from New Zealand, from Mexico, that were able to sit together and put together a draft resolution on the role of parliaments in advancing the two-state solution, with some very important elements there, you know, that ultimately, after a lot of discussion and a lot of tension, the full membership, all the member parliaments, were able to adopt by consensus. And today that is our roadmap for, you know, the work that we need to be conducting with the parliamentarians going forward. So number one, these platforms of engagement. Number two, we believe that capacity building is also very, very important. It's in everyone's interest, and that's the whole logic behind our partnership with the United Nations, for example. The fact that you need to make sure that the MPs are informed and knowledgeable and engaged on the main global issues. And for that, with our partners, we have been developing a whole series of toolkits. Alan just shared with me, thank you. This is just one of them, a very recent one of a project that we did in support of the World Future Council with the Geneva Center for Security Policy and the Basel Center for Peace. Namely the identification of good and effective policies in different regions. Last year it was on peace and future generations. So through an entire selection process, these solid, impactful policies from different regions of the world that have yielded results have been identified. And what we are doing now is to take these examples to the broader membership to try and inspire similar action in other countries and other regions. And number three, we think that tremendously important is this whole focus on accountability. We're very good at talking, we're very good at making commitments, making promises, adopting resolutions, but how do we actually carry through on these? And as an organization, it's not always easy, but we do try to hold the members accountable to the commitments that they have made in a number of ways. This is maybe not the time to go into that. But I would say that this is a core element, I think, in our joint work also going forward. And in response to your question, I think we have the elements of these partnerships that we have been able to build over the years. Clearly the politicians cannot be operating in a bubble. They are not in some ivory tower. They need to be open, inclusive, accessible, and accountable institutions, engaging with the faith-based organizations, with civil society, with the private sector, and together we can help facilitate that, as we did during the Rome conference. So we are very open and willing to join you in this effort to bring about a new and more effective type of alliance. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So thank you for just spelling out to us so clearly how you know and how you think Parliament and members of Parliament should be part of the solution, should be part of being agents of change. So thank you for that and for your willingness to join in a coalition that would work towards that end. But you talked about including civil society, and then of course Dror and Hadir talked about the importance of including women in any new alliance towards peace. But let me come to ask the importance of including young people, because I think several people have mentioned the lack of trust that there is in faith leaders, in parliamentarians, in the multilateral system. Could I bring you in, Issa Shamsu, the founder and executive director of African Students for Interfaith Tolerance in Ghana, a Ghana peace organization, youth peace organization. What role do you think, Issa, that young people have to play here? Or turning it on its head, is it something that young people should be leading? So thank you, Issa.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Issa Shamsu, the Director of African Students for Interfaith Tolerance, a youth-led peace-building organization I founded in 2019 as a result of the fear that I felt in the aftermath of the horrific terror attacks that happened in New Zealand, but also later in Sri Lanka. Primarily to bring together young people to dialogue and to think about a better world. And linking the role of young people to this new alliance in the face of a fragmented world, I would first of all require us to reflect a little bit on how did we get here. If we think about how we got here, then we can have clarity of mindset to be able to move into that future that we envision. Of course, we all know that there are discussions and actually efforts around rearmament and the cuts to investment in education, in peace, and in social services. We are also seeing, I like this framing that came up in our track, the inevitability of wars. That narrative that is going out there. I mean, the narrative around peace through strength. We see how these different actions and narratives perpetuate fears and polarize the world, and unfortunately also contribute to that growing sense of hopelessness and lack of trust that many young people have in institutions and have in bodies that are supposed to deliver us that better future. So the quest to include young people, of course, started way long, but in the UN, 2015, the UN adopted a resolution called UN Security Council Resolution 2250, which fundamentally changed the way the UN system and the international community would work with young people, asking the international community not to see only young people as beneficiaries, but also as partners in peace and security. And I want to commend Globaltex and partners for inviting us young people to be part of this important conversation. I think that for young people to be able to play a critical role in peace and security, we need to be able to balance human security and state security. That is a problem that I think many of the international actors are not really looking at. Because for us, I think that we can only guarantee state security when human security is guaranteed. If people are free from the needs of basic wants, then there is that sense of belonging for the states and for the global community. That is the second thing that I want to emphasize. I want to also emphasize that in this new alliance that we are thinking about and really discussing, I like something Teresa from the World Future Council said, that peace is a verb and is action-oriented. So this new alliance should be something of practical focus, but of course should also be something that would shift us a little away from bureaucracy, but not go into a whole system of bureaucracy. That would make it difficult for young people and people from marginalized backgrounds to be able to engage. I think also we need to also focus the new alliance, especially our next future steps, to see how can we leverage digital technologies to be able to engage a wide range of constituency. We know, for example, many of our young colleagues would take their information from TikTok and other social media platforms. How do we reach out to them, and how do we share the messages of hope, inspiration, and reconciliation with them? That is also very critical. Of course, I also want to really emphasize the enormous challenge that young people and youth-led organizations face. Many youth-led organizations struggle with, first of all, not being recognized. The efforts are not recognized, they're not appreciated. And on top of that, they also deal with issues of funding. You will see that there's a call that is targeting youth organizations, and they're asking for 5 years annual reports. They're asking for very different things that, of course, already exclude a huge chunk of that, that constituency. So let's also think about how do we kind of work on these processes. But of course, I think that there are already existing systems and platforms that when we think about this new alliance, especially engaging with religious actors, there are several platforms that exist that we can take the lessons from and then build an inclusive constituency from that. So building on existing platforms would also be a very good strength that I think that we should focus on. And then just to conclude, I think that one of the challenges that we do have as young people is that we don't just want to make these recommendations and then go out. We want to really be part of building these new systems and these new structures, so that it's not as if young people were consulted. We want young people to be part of the building of these structures and these processes to ensure that they are really meaningfully led and supported by young people. Thank you.
Isha, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I too like that phrase very much, that peace is a verb, it's action-orientated, an active verb. So just thank you for that reminder, particularly that reminder to leverage the power of digital technology and to include young people at every stage of a conversation about what sort of new alliance this might be. Can I turn to our final speaker, and thank you for your patience. I'm very keen to hear the insights of Ibrahim Salama, former ambassador, UN human rights expert, currently the Dean of the Faculty of Law and Director of the Human Rights Research and Training Centre at the British University in Egypt. You're very welcome, Ibrahim. How would you see this new alliance we're talking about at a time when trust in multilateral institutions in particular is so low. We've got the UN under reform, and we've talked about the lack of trust in parliamentarians and in faith institutions right across the board. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about going forward. Thank you, Ibrahim.
Thank you very much, Allison. I think to consider creating a new alliance, I think should start by learning the lessons from the older alliances. And my submission is that if we learn the lessons of the old alliances, we may discover that it's not exactly a new alliance that we need. My submission is that we need a new reconfiguration of the existing alliances and platforms. If my guru, Professor George Zabisab, he used to bring to his students the metaphor of the man from Mars coming, landing in this hall and hearing us for the first time. If I was the man from Mars, I would say, but all what they're looking for, it does exist. Let me give you a few examples. We have the fraternity statement. And if you dig into each and every separate faith tradition, you will find founding documents that constitute a trajectory of thinking and of opening up the dogma under many different circumstances and tensions between law and politics and changing circumstances, technological wars, etc. So within each religious tradition, we have trajectories to learn from. We have documents to undust and reuse and reconfigure. I'll use this term many times. We have also the interreligious, not dialogues and not meetings, please, because everybody knows their limits. Now, the genuine interreligious commitments do exist, and for me, the fraternity document is one of them. I have a human rights reading of it, and it's extensively and by far one of the most progressive documents in terms of approaching. You can disagree with some of the intersectionalities in this document with some human rights or not, but it's still daring to go in the right direction. Arigato's work on child rights and the work with faith actors, it dig deep, very deep into the substantive elements. We have the Wilton Park, numerous meetings and recommendations and findings. You have the work of Azza Karam and the current, despite the limitations within the UN, the interagency task force on religion and development, lots of findings. We have the Faithful Rights Framework and its experience, which trying to be a synthesis, a catalyst of all of the above. We have the all of these documents, we do have them. So what we miss, I think, is how to create synergies, how to connect the dots. Of course, we have a fantastic moment. I think, honestly, if the post-Gaza world is not different from before Gaza, I cannot imagine what more drama and tragedies and how much more blood do we need to realize exactly what Peter and Rodolphe said. Peter said it, and I think it's a core term, the growing moral vacuum. And Peter reflected in the something badly going wrong and the ugly mirror that we don't even want to look at. Now, if Gaza is not the launcher of a fundamental change, I cannot even think of another launcher. So now, from premises and theories and thinking into concrete suggestions in really bullet forms. So I think we need to connect the dots. I think the philosophy should be to connect the dots between the triangle that was either in conflict or in firewalls or in instrumentalization, the law, the ethics, and the religions. Now, how to bring this triangle together. And this inspires me the notion that actually what we need is a reconfiguration in the substantive elements and documents and studies and projects and initiatives, how to bring them together. And I think that the right title that brings this triangle together is something around faith in rights-based ethics. You have all the categories, and that's what I call reconfiguration. And under this, do we need alliance, plan of action? I think we need a consortium. If my understanding is correct, that consortium is existing actors, nothing new, but they just come together to do something specific. Now, to do what? And in my view, this consortium need to use all these existing resources in a synergized manner with the backing and participation of all of members of the consortium, not the new alliance, to do three main functions. And I think this is the type of articulation with clarity and precision of the objective that we need. I think we need first function first and foremost, because we realize the limits of the law and the growing depth of the moral vacuum. We realize the discredit, as you said, Allison, of the international architecture of human rights. This doesn't mean to rest their case, but it means a whole input and project and a lobby. I see us as a lobby for the strengthening and the reforms in the multilateral system. I see the multilateral system struggling with cutting posts, face saving, trying to quadruple the circle, nothing really substantive, frankly speaking. And I think they need fresh ideas from outside. So first function, I would call it, and intellectual property goes to Michael Wiener, to spiritual diplomacy. By diplomacy, I mean a merger of deblocking, diplomacy, and advocacy. Spiritual diplomacy, which is in commitment 11 of the Faithful Rights 18 commitments, which is leveraging the moral and spiritual weight of faith actors. I dare, and I stand to be corrected by all the rabbis, there are no imams now. Our lady imam is not here, Kahina. So I dare to number how many genuinely interreligious, substantive, je pèse mes mots, statements have been issued that are not generalities and niceties. Very few. I consider fraternity document one of them. There are very few of them. Otherwise, they are niceties, and everybody is speaking to. It's a series of monologues couched as a dialogue. So let's not be fooling ourselves. That's the reality. So I think our first function is to be able to come together, send substantive message on world developments from the perspective. And this requires negotiations. Michael and Rabbi Alex would remember that within the Community of Practice of Faithful Rights, at least at 2-3 occasions, we were trying to issue a statement. And even despite all the like-mindedness and good intentions in the world that we claim we all had, it was difficult. But we managed at the end. It wasn't so visible. Why? Because there are so many alliances, so many initiatives, so many recommendations, and of course there is a span of attention which is very limited, and there is a manipulation of the media. But if we come together, send the message with all the added, compounded weight of the members to the consortium, that will make a difference. So first function, spiritual diplomacy. Second one is research and training, research and education, and the third one is training. And under training, I will not say much, we have a lot, but empowering and protecting spaces like Rohr and Ghadir just doesn't come out of compassion. It comes out of empowerment, out of capacity building. Now, my last point is really to say what are the things that we need, the methodological parameter of the consortium that we need to factor in. I think number one is to ensure the synergies, that the platforms are listed. Number two, this will become the conditionality of being a member to the consortium or not. You do not come to put your name on it or use it for your own fundraising purposes or your public relations. There are duties and roles and responsibilities, and there is governance. So with these parameters, drawing from our own lessons in the community of practice, and I'm sure in the discussions, Rabbi Alex and Michael Wiener can add from our collective memory things that we learned from that. So there is a room to do something new, but it's not necessarily a new alliance.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for bringing your expertise and your wisdom to the conversation, and thank you to all our speakers for what they shared with us this morning. I'm going to open to the floor to see if anybody's got any questions or comments. We're aiming to finish at about 11:15, so in about 20 minutes' time. So if you have any questions, we'll bring a mic to you, and perhaps you just introduce yourself and ask your question. And then I'm hoping at the end that we have just a brief reflection from each of our panelists. So any hands up for a question? Yes, please. Can we start here? And if you would just introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maria Lucia Uribe from Arigato International. And thank you so much for, I think, this very inspiring and thought-provoking discussion. And I think building on Ibrahima's last comments, and I'm thinking in the backdrop of all the changes and threats we are seeing in the multilateral system, the budget decrease and increase in military expenditure, and we heard the President of the European Commission just a few days ago, expressing how Europe needs to be rearmed because of the threats that Russia is posing to the European space. And we see also that in the northern countries in Europe, we are seeing religious leaders speaking about spiritual rearmament, that we can see in contrast to the rearmament that countries are speaking in the northern, but it's a language that is a war language that is worrying, I would say. So how an alliance of this type operate when systemic and structural changes are taking place in the way states relate to each other, the rule of laws are violated, and there is a moral vacuum, as Peter mentioned. How this scenario affect, shape, or could negatively or positively influence a type of alliance as we are talking here, and what could be the role of this alliance actually to affect and influence this state of the world that we are seeing. Because I do think we are thinking of an alliance of this type. This alliance will be affected by what is happening in the world today. And if we are thinking of doing something like that, the role should be to influence what is happening in the world. So how do you see those two interactions?
There's about 3 days' worth of answer to that question, I think, actually. So what I'm going to do, thank you for it. It's a very important question. Let's take some more questions or comments and then come to our final comments in the end. But thank you for the depth of that question. Somebody wanted to speak over here. Who was it? Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for this morning. I'm on the business track coming through this, so this is the first time that I'm in the peace track. That's the right way to put it, and every emotion in my body is in the room. I helped lead a masterclass on Wednesday morning, of which we had one topic, which was the idea of hospicing things as businesses need to change and transform. And as you've all spoken, I've heard the word dogma in different ways, and I wondered what you thought of how could we, in the work that you're doing, create a process of dogma being hospicized. And by that I mean, in religious terms, fundamental words, and fundamentalism is the way that often things are treated. In the example we had of the peace process that now needs to happen, if you hold on to your wounds from the past, we'll never get anywhere. We need to find a way to elegantly exit these things. So I wondered perhaps if the word hospicing of dogma resonates in the space that you all operate within, as it did in the room that we were starting the week with.
Thank you. Goodness, a very interesting concept and one I haven't heard before, hospicing of dogma. So thank you for bringing that to us. I'd love to store that up and then reflect on that as we come back to our panel. But thank you. Yes, please do come in.
Hello. Ibrahim, my name's Rabbi Alex Goldberg. I'm on the Faith Rights Executive with Ibrahim and many other things as well. I'm reflecting on over 25 years of attending human rights councils and before that commissions, subcommissions, etc. And representing a Jewish organization, which there are several on the UN, one that was formed in 1947, we were actually pre-registration somehow. And what we used to happen and still happens is a Jewish organization speaks, followed by a Jesuit organization, followed by a Lutheran organization, followed by a Sunni Muslim organization, followed by a Shia. There doesn't seem to be a place where there are, what you're saying, proper multi-faith, multilateral diplomacy going on. Wilton Park gives us space, and I'm grateful. Global ethics gives us space. What I'm doing in London, Faith in the City, the reason we have the third limb looking at global policy and how economics and business and faith can do things is part of the reason that we've added that on. I think I'm going to reflect with a quote from a former senior advisor to one of the former archbishops of Canterbury. We seem to have quite a few these days, who said to me, the problem with my work in interfaith, as Secretary of Interfaith, is that it takes your chief rabbi about 5 years to learn how to do interfaith dialogue when he becomes chief rabbi. And you know what? It takes my archbishop the same time. And by the time they're actually any good at it, they're thinking about retirement. And I think that what we need to do, if it's through global ethics, faithful rights, Wilton Park's track, new alliances, is look at how to give young faith actors, identify them earlier. We're talking about, you talked, Allison, very fluidly in the last 3 days about youth and women. I think young people and female leaders, the tools to do that early on in their career. So when they become the Archbishop of Canterbury, and as Bishop Sarah created the project that I'm currently working on, I think she's going to be a great Archbishop of Canterbury, but when they become Archbishop of Canterbury, or they become Chief Rabbi, or they become a senior imam of the largest mosque in their country, they have that tools going forward, so in day one of the job, they can walk into a world of multi-stakeholder diplomacy and multilateralism to bring peace to the world, to bring communities together, to build bridges, to counter the narratives of hate. And you know why they want to do that? Because that's what they believe in. They just don't have the tools on day one. They're just a very good rabbi, or a very good imam, or a very good vicar. And I think we have a place to do that, so thank you.
Thank you, Alex, very much indeed. Let's take 2 more questions, and then I'd like to come back to our panel. I know we're a little pressed for time. So thank you. Elena, please, and then the second one here. So, Elena, would you like to go first? You've got the microphone, so, okay, why don't you go first, and Elena, you can finish.
Alan Whalewell, Future Council, and commendations to Global Ethics Forum for bringing together really important constituencies for helping build peaceful alliance. You've got our academics, religious faith-based leaders, parliamentarians, academics, youth, educators. It's all very, very important. One of the constituencies I don't see here, which I think is really, really important, and that's the legal community. International law reflects the principles of the key religions, as we've seen through the works of Judge Weeramantry from the International Court of Justice. And it's an important part of the international community for implementing those principles. And so we see, for example, the role of the International Court of Justice in helping to resolve conflicts between states has been really important, and also to bring attention to the obligations of states for very important issues, like the recent one on climate change. So I would recommend bringing in our legal community, lawyers, judges, and those. And I think there's a lot of intersection, as I said, between the principles in international law and the principles from our faith and religions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Elena, would you like to speak?
Thank you very much. I'm Elena Dini from Italy. I used to run a center of formation to interreligious dialogue in Rome. And something that we kept saying is that, okay, we're not doing politics, we're not doing business, and to keep things, to work on keeping things separate. But I think that during these days, well, first of all, I need really to thank Global Ethics for organizing it, and to have those tracks, those different tracks, and to have people from the business track. And I'm so glad that our friend asked the question coming from that different track and underlining it. And I think I follow up on the previous question on business. Like I think I heard something yesterday in the plenary. This lady was saying money is like water. It goes the way it can go. It feels it's easy to go. And sometimes I think that in our conversation, and I couldn't empathize more with what Ibrahim was saying earlier, about also thinking about next steps. And money is also part of it. And I'm wondering if we can reflect also a bit more on how to really enlarge and take that dimension as well into consideration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elena. So you've got your microphone. So final question. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Leon Langdon from Humanists International. One reflection, one comment or question. I think Ibrahim is very correct when he speaks about the existence of many forums at the UN already. To speak to our experience as a non-religious confessional group, or non-confessional group rather, we are included in some. Faith for Rights, for example, we've been part of the inception, whereas sometimes we're pretty late to the party because we're not reached out to by other initiatives, and so I really think there is a need for synergy and some sort of connection among these. When it comes to the genuine multi-faith or interfaith dialogue that you speak of, and I think groups using it for PR or for bolstering their own image is very real, or even more insidiously co-opting human rights language when actually they're working against it, and particularly the language around the right to freedom of religion or belief. If anyone on the panel, Ibrahim included, has any insights as to how we as good-natured and well-intentioned faith actors can work against that and work to uphold human rights for all, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your questions. I'm sure there are lots more, but I would say let's not do a disservice to our questions. I'm aware that some of them are really huge questions, specifically directed to some members of the panel. Might I advertise that there's a coffee break after this session, and please nab the person on the panel that you want to discuss your question with, because I'm going to ask each of our panel, we've got about 10 minutes left, to come back with any reflections they've had on their comments or end reflections that they want to make as we bring this session to a close. So perhaps, Peter, I could start with you.
Thank you very much. These are wonderful questions, and I think they're really helpful in terms of pushing our thinking about any kind of new alliance. So let me start, Leon, with your question about FORB. One of the things that has always made me uncomfortable about the way the U.S. government and the U.S. Department of State approaches this issue is that in setting up a dedicated Office of International Religious Freedom, it had the effect of carving out religious freedom promotion from the broader human rights package that it is necessarily an organic part of, and to thereby create something like almost a hierarchy of human rights. And so I do worry that the trend of creating specialized envoys, specialized ambassadors, separate offices for religious freedom and FORB, without maintaining that crucial connection to the broader human rights agenda is one that takes us precisely in the direction that you're worried about. And so I think there are clear policy implications to that. Alex, I think, makes a really important point that has relevance to the functions that Ibrahim mentioned that a new alliance might play. I've spent a good part of my career thinking about and trying to implement the provision of religious literacy training for diplomats. And there's also work to be done in terms of providing diplomatic literacy training for religious leaders, right? The inverse of that, right? Because it's not that there's only deficits and learning that needs to happen on one side. There's both. And so I think this new alliance could potentially do something in that regard as well. Finally, I mean, Maria Lucia, posed the question, and it goes to something that really worries me today, right, is the fact that you do have spiritual rearmament alongside military rearmament, and sometimes the spiritual rearmament is occurring in collaboration with the militarists, right, and which is why I think the civil societal locus of this alliance is crucially important, because it needs to be able to fully, truly be autonomous and stand apart from those structures. And it gets to the point about funding as well, right? So many of the multi-faith efforts we know about rely on money coming from governments that at the end of the day have specific agendas and are trying to co-opt religion in order to project certain kinds of identities that are not so consistent with some of the things that they themselves are doing in the world, which is why an independent source of funding for such a new alliance would be crucially important.
Thank you, Peter. Rudolf.
Thank you very much. All very rich questions, and indeed you would need 3 or more days to go over them. So forgive me for just being able to shed some thoughts or share some short thoughts on it. I go back to your initial question, in fact, where you mentioned, do we speak to our friends, you know, in religion in the first place? And I think that's certainly the way we have to go about it, to start there. But we cannot leave out to those who we think are not immediately our friends, because that's where the power lies, that's where the people are. So I think the challenge would be how such an alliance, or as is coming up, or how Globe Ethics also can foster a thinking out of the box of people from these communities, you know. So you cannot just stay with the friends, you have to go beyond them. And Ibrahim also mentioned the importance of training and giving opportunities for young people, or for people in more general that might not necessarily have access to it, to then foster a counter-narrative from their experience, in fact, they have on the ground, which is often not in line with their own leaders, or with these tendencies that strategically articulate a spiritual armament. Because that also, if I may make a brackets here, spiritual armament is often also not from faith leaders. It's not from the people, not from faith, it's from specific movements that stir up such a, with lots of money, that stir up such a position and do an alarmism, so that people think, well, the end of the world is near, so we have to position ourselves together with governments to avoid that from happening. And that gives a very, very dangerous amalgam. So I think training and research and education are tantamount indeed in this. I believe also FORB can be part of that if it's not co-opted by specific government policies, because in my context at least, often people think, well, human rights is for others, not for me, mainly a left-wing agenda. It is only there for the bandits, you know, and on the other hand, religious freedom is only for me and not for the others. And these two have to be brought together again and go beyond that. And that we have to do on the grassroots level, because we don't reach people there. The polarization, the depolarization we have in Brazil and other countries will not go away. So I think this can be fostered and triggered and animated by such alliance, and also by Globe Ethics, as it is thankfully doing.
I'll stop you just for a moment to go to Anda, because I know Anda's particularly...
Yes, in fact, I had ended here. Sorry, I just had my... Thank you.
Thank you, Rudolf, very much. Anda.
Yes, thank you very much, Allison. Very, very good questions indeed, and a lot of food for thought. And I think they all point to this need that we all feel to how do we better equip our respective constituents with the tools that they need to deliver on our shared objectives, because it's pretty basic, no? What do we want? We want a peaceful world with human dignity for all, rooted in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And I think from that perspective, I agree with Ibrahim that we have the elements at our fingertips. We have the platforms, the initiatives, the tools. The question is, how do we best leverage these? Through reconfigurations, through new energies, in order to get that fresh energy that we really need. And I just want to echo, yes, absolutely, women and youth essential. I mean, we're very proud to be a very gender-sensitive organization, and we see how women have transformed it. The agenda, the rules, the statutes, you name it. And youth also, we're making a conscious effort, just change the age of young MPs to under 40, making sure they systematically have a voice in each and every initiative that we undertake. Number two, to make the most of the opportunities as they present themselves. We have our assembly coming up next week, very soon. So we're holding 2 workshops, one on parliamentary mediation. How can they do a better job in building bridges in their own countries, but also with MPs from other countries, and a second one on religious literacy with our partners, because we do absolutely agree that education is absolutely key, and through their legislative functions, we need to make sure that the MPs are paying attention to the curricula, and that curricula inspires young people to know and to respect the others. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Ibrahim.
Brilliant questions, telegraphic answers. I think Peter said something very important at the beginning. I want to underline it again, which is the need for this to become to be completely non-governmental. And here the underlying issue is the very fragile independence or lack thereof of faith actors. And I see one of the functions of a reinvigorated consortium of faith in rights-based ethics to do the function of protection. We can give ourselves the function, what's the name of the function, which is the focal point is our special representative in New York, retaliation. When retaliation happens against those NGOs who deal with human rights mechanisms, there is a function by the Secretary General and an annual report on these cases. So I think we will, reprisals, so focal point on reprisals. We can give ourselves the function of issuing a report on reprisals as a defense for the independence of the middle category that Peter was trying to describe. And I think, Michael, you wrote an article on how to define faith actors who are human rights friendly and what's the kind of due diligence one should do. Again, as Rudolph, you said, it's a very mixed bag. And unfortunately, counterintuitively, the corruption in the religious sphere, there's no monopoly, including in the religious sphere. It's like, it's business and religion and money and politics. They're extremely fragile. So if we create that, it's a double safe space. It's safe space in the sense of defending the independence, and I don't think there is a function in the whole forest of human rights mechanism that defends the independence. You have the independence of lawyers and judges. You don't have the independence of religious actors. And I think this is a gap. If there's only something completely new, this is completely new. The shift in the dogma would be, I think, from defending each faith traditions, communities, into everybody defending everybody. And I think this should be clear as a fundamental rule of that consortium. It's a protection also for people who work on the ground, because then when they come with Muslims and when, with atheists and others to speak, they're not against their own church. They are part of something that has been articulated as filling a gap of protecting the independence of the faith voice and actors.
Ibrahim, thank you. Thank you very much. Final word, Isa.
Thank you. I think that the very key points have also been highlighted. I just want to also really emphasize the point around protection. I remember in our track, Archbishop mentioned how speaking up for the other could actually also lead you into very difficult circumstances, and I see that happening because in Ghana, my local tribe is part of a conflict, unfortunately, and when you're talking about peace, then they see you as someone who is betraying them, right? Someone who is not for them. So that could also be a very significant issue. So protection and safeguarding, number one. Number two, I think that in any alliance that we are going to come up with, consortium or a plan, we just have to be very intentional about the framing without ordering. I always try to find a balance between us being independent and us not victimizing governments, so that governments do not see us as competitors but as partners. So drawing the line between how we work between governments and also among ourselves. I also want to highlight the need for preventive diplomacy that emphasizes on measurement and accountability. People really need to know the impact of peace investment in terms of not only in dollar terms, but in terms of how many lives are saved as a result of that. Then also, I want to also highlight the need to ensure that there are mechanisms in place to ensure there's a loop in terms of the participation and contribution of young people. Just like I mentioned in my initial remarks, sometimes you contribute, but you don't know how and how far your contributions went. And then you come back again and there's a consultation, and young people say, like, we've been talking about these spaces for so many years. I want to know what has been the impact of these different contributions that we've made over the years. Then I want to also remind us, I think it was a really very important point that was mentioned. We need to reflect on how we got into this fragmented world, and also to address the issue of the inevitability of wars, because I think that as a new alliance, we need to really emphasize on that. And finally, to say that I like the idea of hospicing, but also this is going to go back to my earlier point about framing in terms of what kind of hospicing of dogma that we want to invest in. So really, really grateful for the opportunity, and thank you so much.
My pleasure, and thank you to our panel for all their energy and for the fresh thinking on this topic. Thank you very much indeed. So I'm going to bring this session to an end. I think we've got a coffee break now. Do grab the people you need to speak to if your question hasn't been answered, but thank you to all our speakers.